Hello everybody and welcome back to How to Get Better at World of Warships, and this is episode 4 where I talk about Autobounce and Overmatch. So we're going to talk about one concept first, and that is the Autobounce mechanic, because it is a relatively simple to understand mechanic. So here I am in a Saint Louis, tier 9 French cruiser, 203mm guns, armor piercing at 1.5 kilometers has roughly about 400mm of armor penetration. And I'm going to target the 160mm upper armor belt of a Bismarck. Now you can see the division between the main armor belt and the upper armor belt because it's actually kind of clear. You'll see a line between those two. So targeting the upper armor belt, and I'm going to fire. And what's going to happen is that all 6 of my shells are going to ricochet. Now why is that? It's because in a Saint Louis, I have an Autobounce region that starts at 45 degrees and it goes up to 60 degrees. So at 45, I have no percent chance to autobounce, and at 60 degrees is 100% chance. In this particular example, I was at 62 degrees. Navigator uses the other axis to start at, so I'm at 28 degrees. And to sort of explain it a little bit better, here we go. I'm going to lay it out like this. So before I get anywhere else, let me first sort of orient you where this arrow is pointing. This is where Navigator starts. So you can see it starts at 0 and it goes up all the way, 30, 40, 50, 60. But when I was talking about 45 to 60, I start here because the developers treat this as having no angle, and at 45 and then with 30 would be that 60 degree zone. So now that I've oriented you at 28 degrees, right, you'll see that I'm firmly inside that red zone. So that red zone is 100% auto bounce region for Saint Louis. If I shoot inside that zone, my shells are just going to auto bounce. However, in the orange zone, which is between 30 and 45, if you read it from the way the Navigator does it, or 45 to 60, if you go by the developers, then that zone has an auto bounce percentage chance. And it starts at 0% at 45, and by the time it gets to 60 or 30, whichever way you want to read this, it is 100%, and it's a linear increase, right? So, you can think about it sort of halfway between there is a 50% chance, bit of a coin flip. And finally, we get to the green zone, and in the green zone, there is absolutely no auto bounce at all. It is purely how much penetration you have versus how much effective armor the other ship has. This is something that I'm going to cover in another video where I'll explain how you can use actual effective armor thickness as another means of defending yourself, but it is a little bit more complicated, so I'll leave it for a different video. For now, let's just talk about auto bounce. So for Saint Louis, this is how it works. However, there are exceptions in the game. And one of them is the US heavy cruisers. Do keep in mind heavy cruisers, so that means, tier 6 to tier 10, not the light cruisers. So once again, same angle, same distance, targeting Bismarck, upper belt, and watch what happens. Boom. 5 penetrations, 7,590 damage. And that's because the US heavy cruisers have an auto bounce range that goes from 60 to 67.5 instead of 45 to 60. So that means there's a much bigger section of green. This is an area that the auto bounce doesn't apply. A small section of the orange, and then again there's the red section. But you'll notice that the original angle, which was 28 degrees, is now very, very close to the green, just a little bit in the orange, where the auto bounce chance is quite low. And so in that case, where I was using it against the Bismarck with a Wichita, I rolled the dice and hey, I pass the auto bounce check and boom, I penetrate and I do good damage. Where in the same exact position as a Saint Louis with its normal auto bounce angles, it basically just ricochets. So I've kind of gone and made a kind of easy, short rule of thumb kind of auto bounce angles. So pretty much every battleship in the game, except for Hood and Duke of York, is 45 to 60. So it's just like the Saint Louis. Hood and Duke of York have USN heavy cruiser auto bounce angle, 60 to 67.5. Almost every cruiser, except for the few listed below, are going to be 45 to 60. Stalingrad being sort of special at 55 to 65. US heavy cruisers, like I mentioned earlier, 60 to 67.5. UK light cruisers above tier 6 are 60 to 75, and the tier 5 and below UK light cruisers are 65 to 80. However, if you want a website that likes to give you a lot of stats that you can look into really in-depth details, I recommend this one in particular. It's called proships.ru, and I'll show you how to use it. So let's say I want to look up a specific ship. So let's look up the tier 9 Saint Louis that I was just playing. So here we go. And Saint Louis, if you scroll down, you'll notice there's a section about the armor piercing. This is like how much armor piercing damage you do per shell, what's your alpha strike, What's your DPM? So really helpful numbers. But look down here, you notice there's a thing called the Ricochet Angle. That's the Autobounce region, 45 to 60. Now, if you want to compare it to, let's say, the Wichita, and let's go back for a second, and we'll take a look at the Tier 8 US heavy cruiser, the Wichita, you'll notice that right here, the Ricochet Angle 60 to 67.5. Furthermore, this website's really useful because it can do one other really cool thing, which is if you select a tier and a class, you can compare across all the ships. So you can actually see in Tier 9 all the Autobounce for all the ships. So let's go down here and you'll notice that the majority of them are like 45 to 60, 45 to 60. And then you'll notice that Neptune is like 60 to 75. And you'll notice all the American ones, Alaska, Buffalo, 60 to 67.5. Now, knowing this information that you're getting from this website allows you to play both offense and defense. Because on offense, you'll know when you're able to go to AP and do some good AP damage, right? Also on this website, you can find like penetration and stuff like that. But like I said, I'll cover that in a different video. You can also tell in what situation with which particular nation's cruisers or whatever, you get special Autobounce regions, and you might be able to utilize that. It also teaches you how to play defense because it also goes to show you that, hey, if you angle your ship to this kind of angle, then shells hitting you are going to bounce. So now you go in game and you're pretty confident. You're like, okay, if I extremely angle my armor, it's going to bounce stuff. So let's say you're playing that Baltimore over there and you run up against Warspite, big battleship, 381mm guns. All right, so you angle your armor, you point your bow at them, and the Warspite fires. And holy crap, it looks like it worked, right? You ricocheted all the shells and you took no damage. So you think, all right, you know what? I'm going to go play a different ship. You switch over to, let's say, a big battleship like the Colorado, and you try the same thing, right? You kind of point your bow and try to get really angled and say, all right, the Autobounce is going to work for me. And the Warspite fires its salvo and it goes, nope. And you take a hefty salvo like this one, like 17,000, and you're in so much pain and you're like, wait, what just happened? Did it fail me? Yeah, you ran into a mechanic called Overmatch, which ignores Autobounce. So going back to our nice little webpage, the proships.ru page, and I'm on Warspite's page. So if you scroll down, right above the Ricochet Angle, which is still normal, 45 to 60, you'll notice that there is something called Ricochet Millimeter. This is actually the Overmatch number. So what this means is that Warspite's 381mm guns is able to forcibly overmatch 26.64 millimeters of armor. If you have more than this number, the shells will then go through the Autobounce check. And if the Autobounce check is successful, like I did with the Baltimore, the shells will ricochet. However, if you have less armor than this 26.64 number, then the Autobounce doesn't apply. The shells will just straight penetrate because that armor is so very thin. So now that you've looked on the proships.ru webpage, you've found the Overmatch number, and you've seen that example previously of the Warspite versus the Colorado and the Baltimore, go in game and take a look at the armor model. And the armor model is right above survivability. It's a drop-down menu. So you click on it, drop down, and you can look at the actual armor. So the Colorado has 25mm bow, 25mm upper belt area. So against the Warspite, if you're sitting in like this, super angled, it won't do anything. The Warspite's 381mm guns loading AP will just overmatch and penetrate and do huge amounts of damage. This is the reason why Warspite's one of the best tier 6s, because it has that overmatch capability, while a lot of ships like, for example, New Mexico or Fuso do not. So how does that, translate to what happened with Baltimore? Well, that's interesting because take a look at the Baltimore. And the Baltimore, like the other USN heavy cruisers, tier 8 and above, so 8, 9, and 10, have 27mm plating on the bow, on the upper belt, and on the stern, which means that a Baltimore, if it's angled within that Autobounce region, cannot be overmatched, first of all, right? So it cannot be overmatched by 381, which means that you enter the Autobounce check. And of course, if you're angled like this, the Autobounce check is basically 100%. It automatically ricochets all the shells. And a Warspite cannot do anything against the Baltimore that's sitting in this very angled kind of position. However, it can do really good damage against, let's say, Colorados. I'm going to give you a bit of a, let's say, a cheat sheet at just, in a little bit, where I'm pretty much going to tell you sort of rough rules of thumb as to what to expect. However, we're going to do one more example, and we're going to use a very interesting ship. Let's use the nice now tier 7 German battleship. This battleship is pretty interesting, and let's say it's doing this, right? Same thing as the Colorado, it's doing this. You'll notice that it's got a huge chunk of armor here that's 70 millimeters thick, but this one is 25. This is going to affect how you aim. Let's say you're a Warspite and a Gneisenau is trying to rush you down. Now, Warspite obviously too slow, can't run away, and Gneisenau is just charging you down like this, staying as angled as possible, let's say. What do? You can't shoot this area because if you shoot here, you're just going to auto bounce. Well, you're just going to have to aim a little differently, right? Aim up, try to hit the upper 25 millimeter piece as you're kiting away, and you'll be able to do damage. So studying the armor models, knowing what your overmatch is, knowing the capabilities of your auto bounce is all super important if you want to do well in the game. So here's the cheat sheet, and we're going to start with 203 to 220 millimeter guns. So you overmatch 14.2 to 14.69 millimeters. I mean, you're really going to be effective there against UK light cruisers up to about tier 7 and certain destroyers, but you really should look at the armor profile there. But again, against destroyers, might as well just use HE. But against the light cruisers, the AP does work. 283 millimeters is the first real sort of battleship tier, and this is really ships like Scharnhorst. Graf Spee also carries this weapon. Overmatch 19.79, mostly dealing with low tier battleships and cruisers up to tier 7. The first commonly seen battleship caliber is 305 to 356 millimeters. They overmatch 21.33 to 24.9 millimeters, and mostly you're beating on tier 5 and lower battleships. So if you've got those kind of calibers, that is what you're beating up on. So an example is like if you're in a New Mexico or a Fuso, you can beat up on a Congo, for example, if the Congo is trying to go bow into you. The next major breakpoint is 380 millimeter plus guns. So this is like Bayern, Warspite, Queen Elizabeth, Bismarck, Gneisenau. You can overmatch 26.57. So you can beat up on battleships up to about tier 7. You're unable, however, to deal with 27 millimeter USN heavy cruiser plating. 406 millimeter guns and above, of course, this is like Colorado, Nagato, Iowas, those kind of ships. Overmatch 28.67. Now you can deal up to tier 7 battleships pretty easily. You still can't overmatch tier 8 plus battleships. USN 27mm plating, however, is no longer a problem, but 30mm cruiser deck plating can be a problem here. The 30mm cruiser deck plating is resolved at the 430 plus mark. So this is like Republique, this is ships like Thunderer, Ohio, Kremlin. Those guns, you're still unable to overmatch the 32mm bows of tier 8 and bigger battleships. However, the 30mm cruiser plating issue is resolved. And finally, you have the 460mm guns. These are on Musashi and Yamato, and these are the only guns in the game that can overmatch 32mm plating. So against a bow on Kremlin, for example, you can overmatch the upper portion of the bow, but not the lower, as that armor is still too thick. And of course, the main sort of funny little exception to most of these rules is Piotr Wilecki down at tier 5, which just laughs at all of your peasants, because if you look at the armor model, the bow armor of the Piotr Wilecki is absolutely hilarious. Go take a look. It is stupidly thick. It can auto bounce every single one of these shells. So Piotr Wilecki just laughs at you peasants. Anyways, folks, I hope this video has been helpful to all of you. Please stay tuned as more of the series is going to be coming along. Leave me your comments in the comment section below. If you've got questions, whatever, leave it there as well. I'll try my best to get to them. Other than that, take care of yourselves, have a good one, and I'll talk to all of you again soon.